Yeah, J.K. Rowling needs to pay for my therapy or anything else in this video. But anyway, so what's up, my beautiful, brilliant scholars? I hope you're having a lovely day despite, the plague. Me, like a lot of millennials in quarantine, have been falling back on bad childhood habits. Reading, writing, watching Netflix, drawing, all those terrible ne'er-do-well hobbies we were like kids or teens. And one of those bad childhood habits, I think I mentioned them before, at least on my end, was reading a lot of fantasy stories, and a lot of them were pretty questionable. I'm gonna say this straight up. Just because a piece of media was formative for you doesn't mean it was any good then or now. And I read a lot of stuff that was not good then or now. But two of the least questionable children's books, well, children's fantasy books anyway, I reread in my novelistic speed run were the Harry Potter series by a TERF named J.K. Rowling and the Percy Jackson series by an English teacher named Rick Riordan. I think it might have something to do with structure or just quarantine in general. I really found Percy Jackson was a much better time this time around. I'll tell you that. Puzzles are great fun, but white people bullshit isn't. So, even though I really enjoyed like the Harry Potter books as a kid, especially since they were like basically Agatha Christie novels with fantasy dressing, I'm not really in the current mood to watch Harry and his friends solve Scooby-Doo mysteries while trying to like go to magical classes and not die at the hands of a magical evil Nazi Hitler dictator Voldemort. Percy Jackson, meanwhile, was more of a collection of tween-age road trip stories where Percy and his friends go on adventures, like a bunch of life-saving field trips a la Zuko and fetch quests, because sometimes the greatest adventures are the friends you make along the way. There was something else I uncovered while reading these. Percy Jackson was much more palatable to me to read than Harry Potter, even besides J.K. Rowling being a TERF. I don't think I've made that clear. Was Percy Jackson as a series never puts the onus of recovery, healing, and forgiveness on the shoulders of the abuse victims in the same way that Harry Potter does. That's wild to me, because like Harry Potter, if anything, was about like people like surviving abuse and impossible odds and everything like that, but it still made Harry out to be like Wizard Jesus, that sort of absolves his abusers of sins. I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's discuss this. Harry and Percy of Harry Potter and Percy Jackson series, respectively, are both very similar as protagonists, as are both black-haired, green-eyed white boys with a sarcastic wit and never-ending loyalty that gets them and their friends in trouble. They had very troubled non-magical upbringings and had to deal with abusers, bullies, and other garbage experiences before even getting to their magical places of like Hogwarts and Camp Half-Blood. That's just good writing, to be honest. Cinderella Circumstances, I think that's what the trope is called. You're writing, unless your parents are like hippies or free range in stories, or, I know it's easier to say where a kid is, in a story if their parents are abusive or absent or dead. In a less grim note, I do really believe that kids should be allowed to develop their own critical thinking skills and question systems that have authority over them, because, it makes smarter adults. Rules are malleable and outright malicious if the death of an innocent person are deemed justice by the apathetic powers that be, and both Harry and Percy have to deal with a law of apathetic powers that be. And those apathetic powers that be, in the case of Percy Jackson and Harry Potter, are the teachers at Hogwarts and the wizarding government system in Harry Potter. And in Percy Jackson, it's just human. In Percy Jackson, it's human error and neglectful systems that have fucked Percy over and fucked his friends over even before he gets to Camp Half-Blood. the American educational system is a joke, especially with neurodivergent kids, or any kid that has any learning disability. Before we get into Percy and Harry and their different reactions to their different abusers, I want to talk about Luke and Voldemort from Percy Jackson and Harry Potter respectively. Luke kind of had a point there. I'm gonna be straight with y'all, even though I'm gay. For the uninitiated, Luke was the main antagonist of Percy Jackson. In the world of Percy Jackson, there's a lot of demigod kids, and Luke was one of them, as well as being Percy's former friend. The Anakin Skywalker to Percy's Obi-Wan Kenobi, if you will. Luke was a kid, and I know it's like he never like passes the moral event horizon. Even after he tries to kill Percy and his friends a lot of times, he never succeeds in killing them. And he doesn't. And while he does like use like his former like demigod like peers as like spies or use them to like join his part of the rebellion, he never kills anyone or abuses anyone. And that's more to say that that's more than you can say about Voldemort, which is like Voldemort's thing is just being the worst and not, just the worst, unrepentantly terrible. Voldemort, by contrast, is essentially a wizard Nazi born out of the xenophobia and eugenics politics that the wizarding world has. And I find as I grow up, like Voldemort's less of an horrifying outlier and more of an ugly reflection of the wizarding community's worst traits. I know it's like Harry and his friends by the series end, they just sort of, instead of like battling the systems or like dismantling any of the toxic systems that the wizarding world has, they just sort of become the top of the systems. But off track. Back to Luke. Luke and Percy Jackson, like the most he grows up to be is like 22. And like he's like under 22 for most of the series, so he's like a young teenage boy who's the son of Hermes, who'd grown up as a homeless kid from age 9 on because his mother was unstable and his father was apathetic up until he joined Camp Half-Blood. Oh god. And demigod kids in this series have to deal with like a lot of shit, both on like the fact that they're like every demigod kid in Percy Jackson, they have ADHD and dyslexia, so they're already like thrown away by the educational system. And Luke being homeless, he had to scrape for food and fight monsters with his friends Annabeth and Talia, who were other demigods. And so by the time they got to Camp Half-Blood, Luke was already pretty burnt out. But Luke was burnt out by years of homelessness, parental instability, and just general neglect. And to be honest, eventually Luke got to Camp Half-Blood, but it only led to more problems on his end. I guess we can talk about Camp Half-Blood now. Camp Half-Blood is a safe place for all demigods to build their strengths and make friends, like a magical pit stop for, if you will, for demigod kids to be safe, and it's like a safe house. So Hogwarts and Harry Potter is more of it's a boarding school, right? And if we're going to compare Hogwarts to Camp Half-Blood, adventures are the friends you made along the way. And Hogwarts is full of adventure and has all these magical, cool lessons, but in the end, it's a school, it's an institution. And the institutions are bound to the whims of the wizarding government. And yeah, Hogwarts does let the wizarding government in and let them affect how they react to certain crises, if you will. Camp Half-Blood, by contrast, is a safe place for demigods to live, but it's a camp, a supplement, a foster home. Much of the character growth the demigods have to go through is out in the real world, not at the camp. And the whole point of Camp Half-Blood is to train the demigods to have a life outside their borders. A lot of kids want to go to Camp Half-Blood and can stay there, but they're not. But they can't stay there forever. And so it's a less of a permanent house and more of a plot convenience pit, essentially being a large foster home. Camp Half-Blood was made as a result of the shitty practices of the Greek gods it ranged from, not as a result of any of the gods' kindness. Camp Half-Blood changes to help benefit future demigods to make lives for themselves. Hogwarts refuses to do so because in the end it benefits from the toxic system it has in place. Change is good, tradition is fine, but not at the detriment of actual human lives, even, half human lives. Speaking of systems, though, let's go back to Luke for a second. The systems in place by the gods are what made Camp Half-Blood necessary, like I said. It's up to the gods themselves to change the system from the ground up, instead of relying on their demigods to just, deal with it, just leave it to the kids, I suppose. Out to Camp Half-Blood for plot reasons, it'll come back. Luke was gifted a quest from his father, Hermes, but Luke's failure in that quest left him extremely bitter and more trauma on top of it, raging at the gods' apathy and indirectness on account of his own life and the lives of other demigods like him, who similarly were fucked over by the Hellenistic system. It's no surprise that he planned revenge against Olympians in the end. I guess my main gripe with the movies, by the way, was the lack of culpability for the Olympians and any of the gods, right? So, in the movie, I'm not gonna get too much into the Percy Jackson movies, but generally in the movie, the god Poseidon, he fell in love with Percy's mom, and they had a kid, and Poseidon tried to live as like a human being, and he was like called back by the gods, and because of Poseidon's like too much love for Percy's mom and Percy, Poseidon was punished, and Poseidon's action led to all the guys not being able to speak to their own kids. The problem with that is in the book, it's not like Poseidon's super duper loving whatever that led to Percy being born. What led to Percy being born is that Poseidon and Percy's mom had a one summer fling and just had a baby, and it's that simple. And in Percy Jackson, it is absolutely the fault of Poseidon and the rest of the Olympians that the Olympians can no longer talk to their kids. It was because the last time they had a decent relationship with their kids, it caused World War II. So yeah, it's totally their fault. It's just so taking away the culpability takes away much of the structure of the books, and makes the payoff later on in the books less satisfying as a result. Just no. Just no. Throw all the gods away. Anyway, okay. That being said, just because I agree that the Greek gods were full of shit doesn't mean that I think that Luke wasn't right with how he went about his plan to destroy the system of power put in place by the Olympians. That lists the gods as evading consequences and the demigods as pawns who clean up their parents' bullshit. That part was true. I agree that Luke had a point there. But the problem is you don't solve one problem with an even worse problem. You would scorch the earth to make a way for greener pastures in the future, but you wouldn't drop a nuke on a shitty building in order to knock it down. That's not how it works. Summoning his evil granddad, Cronus, who was a Titan, Luke wasn't making the right decision because it would eventually hurt the people Luke had previously sworn to protect. You don't stop abuse with more abuse. But that's our antagonists, right? Those are our antagonists, Voldemort and Luke, right? Good thing we have Percy and Harry's protagonists, right? We're mostly talking about Percy, though. Percy grew up in a similarly shitty home life to Luke, but with one key difference: his mother, Sally Jackson. Sally Jackson is a mortal woman who'd grown up with her own difficult life, so by the time she had Percy, she'd already gone through some shit. The interesting thing is, Sally cuts off the cycle of abuse when it comes to Percy. She adores her little blue son. He's not blue, but he likes her little blue loving son. She always makes sure that Percy feels loved and welcome when he's at home. She also makes a lot of sacrifices on behalf of Percy, marrying an abusive man, because His pungent odor grants Percy some safety from the threat of monsters growing up, and never denigrating Percy for his ADHD or dyslexia, sending him to specialized schools despite Percy's, poor grades and being expelled like a lot from K to 12. In the first book, as an example of her cutting off system abuse when the system becomes too hard to bear. Sally ends her abusive relationship with her ex-husband by straight up murking him. I love this. Turning her ex-husband to stone by using a gorgon head Percy had left to her. Percy is saying that his mother is perfectly capable of taking care of herself, and that while she might need help, that doesn't mean she needs to be rescued. To see that people don't want a rescuer all the time, and people are capable of making their own decisions. But it's nice to have a friend. Percy's mother comments that Poseidon wanted to build her a palace at the bottom of the sea, but Sally refused, wanting to live her own life on her own terms. It's one thing to want to rescue someone from the evils of the world. It's another to offer aid and a listening ear to those most in need. Sally's kindness and strength and rebellious streak teaches Percy to step to even the worst bullies and abusers of life, but also to keep his heart and be kind to those who most deserve his kindness. Sally, along with, Percy's other demigod friends and their adventures and so on, of course, teaches Percy how to be a friend. And I think that's what sets Percy Jackson apart from Harry Potter as a series. It teaches kids people don't need to be saviors, they need friends, and Percy is nothing if not an amazing friend. But just because you're a friend to someone doesn't mean that you have to, forgive your abusers or bullies for being terrible people. Speaking of which, let's fast forward to the end of the series, because that's the most important part, and I haven't gotten over it, and that's why I made this video in the first place. By the end of the series, slight spoiler, Percy and his friends save the day, yay! But not without significant loss and painful lessons as repercussion. Yay! As a reward for his heroism, the Olympians offer Percy immortality, basically giving him godhood as a reward for being extra super nice and defeating this pesky Titan demigod threat they just couldn't do themselves. And Percy gets this, rejects them. You want to know why? I mean, I'm pretty sure you all guessed, you're smart scholars, but let's let Percy explain. Let's let Percy explain. I thought about the three fates. The way I'd seen my life flashed by, I could avoid all that. No aging, no death, no body in the grave. I could be a teenager forever in top condition, powerful and immortal, and serving my father. I could have power and eternal life. Who would refuse that? And then I looked at Annabeth, my friend again. I thought about my friends from camp, Charles Beckendorf, Michael Hughes, Selena Beauregard, so many others who were now dead. I thought about Ethan McNamara and Luke. I knew what to do. No, I said. The council fell silent. The gods frowned at each other like they misheard. Percy Jackson, The Last Olympians. Switching back to Harry Potter for one last time. I was confused by the vitriol people had for the epilogue of the series back when I first read it, because I kind of liked that Harry named his son Albus Severus. I mean, I thought it would fit in the weirdly British Tolkien-esque naming system Harry Potter had set up in the first place. But as I grew up, I realized something. Harry makes heroes out of people who would hurt him, and that's a bad thing. Voldemort, Stalin, you were named after the two bravest people I ever knew. Because that's what Harry Potter does in the end. It forgives abusers without perspective or care for how the victims might feel. As much as Harry chastises his abusers and mentors throughout the series, and as much as Harry learned throughout the series not to give into stereotypes and that good people can make bad mistakes and bad people can change, Harry still succumbs to the status quo, absolving both his mentors and his abusers of their transgressions and honoring them through naming his own child their names. When I talk about toxic systems and dismantling them, I don't mean some dumbass Joker watching the world burn so I can rule it type bullshit. I mean acknowledging the terrible shit that abusers have done and toxic systems have done, and breaking intergenerational curses even if you benefit from those toxic systems, those generational curses for the greater good. I'm not saying that Harry is an abusive person to his children, no. I'm saying that Harry and his friends were in a unique position to change the bullshit that made ugly and evil things, and that, you know, for example, Voldemort and what he is, and they just don't. Harry assimilates into wizarding life as a hero who saved the wizarding world from their sins, and instead of maybe, you know, pushing to change wizard racism, recognizing humanoid folks like Hagrid or Dobby as real beings worthy of their making their own voices, worthy of having their own voices, and just listening and trying to do better and doing better. But instead of acknowledging that they've had some sort of, and instead of acknowledging that they've made some sort of better work for their children, the epilogue implies that they've just become part of a system that has already harmed them by putting themselves at the very top. I think I said this before. Like, Voldemort literally laid you out as a lamb for a slaughter, Harry. I'm not sure. It's only Slytherins who are capable of doing great evil, so it's rich that you told your son you're not going to disown him for or abuse him for being a Slytherin when you got some evil folks in your own house. And the series alone, let me list some shit out for you. Harry was left and sent back into an abusive home even after going to Hogwarts, slandered by the wizarding government and the wizarding press for saying that Voldemort is back and he saw it with his own 2 eyes, tried for a misdemeanor, put on trial for a misdemeanor when he was acting in self-defense in an effort to silence him, abused by a government entity to the point that his only safe space, Hogwarts, was compromised because the adults didn't push back against it. And Dumbledore just bounced when Harry needed him the most because he figured his inaction would direct Voldemort to Dumbledore himself. Bitch, he doesn't want you. He's trying to kill Harry. He was trying to kill Harry since he was fucking born. And Harry had to make up for his mentor's inaction and incompetence in order to protect himself and his classmates from actual death. And you're telling me, to my homosexual black ass face, that Harry Potter becomes a fucking fed as a result of all of this? And this is just in book 5. I could go on forever. I won't. Percy. Okay. Percy, by stark contrast, realized that all his actions in the book ended up being Percy, by stark contrast, realized that all the actions and the issues of the book series ended up being a result of the gods breaking their own rules and seeing their demigod kids as either ammunition or collateral. And Percy, who's been seeing that the gods are full of shit, yes, even your favorites, yes, even the good ones, rejects good godhood and immortality in favor of making sure that a situation like this will never happen to the demigod kids again. And I love how Zeus, if I could show the section on screen, Zeus is being told what to do from a fucking child. Bitch, you're acting like a fucking child. The kid has to make up for it. And that's why Percy Jackson is ultimately the better series. Percy held the gods accountable for their bullshit, and that's why the series ended where it ended. It's a whole new world out there with a system that puts demigods first and turns camp help. Yeah, that's why the series ends where it does. The conflicts that set the series in motion in the first series. The first Percy Jackson series. I haven't read the rest of the series yet. Don't roast me. Okay. The conflicts that put the series in motion in the first series are just not a thing. It's a whole new world by the time Percy he grants demigod kids fealty. He has their parents claim them by the time they're 13. He makes houses for the minor gods, so there's no resentment, and that they and their kids are honored. Hell, even Hades didn't have a house at camp, and that's fucked up. He's not Olympian, but that's fucked up, man. It's a whole new world out there with a system that puts demigods first and turns Camp Half-Blood into a safe house option for the demigods themselves, instead of as a last resort from the gods' negligence and putting their poor kids on a societal life support. Percy then wanted to put himself on top of the pyramid of a toxic system. He wanted to throw all that shit out. He wants the cycle of abuse to stop, so he stops it. He stops it. It's that simple. Again, listening and trying. I briefly mentioned that Percy's fatal flaw is loyalty, or at least I implied it. I'm sorry. So even if he rightfully takes down his enemies for their transgressions, he also takes down their grievances. Okay. I sort of implied it, but I'll say it here. Percy's fatal flaw is loyalty. So even if Percy rightfully takes down his enemies for their transgression, he also takes on their grievances, especially if they're demigods like him. The fact that a vulnerable poor kid with cognitive disabilities has to make the apathetic people in power listen or else is rich to me. But children are the future and all that. Children are the future. And I think Percy has learned well by his 𝗲𝗡𝗦 series, and as much as Harry Potter fights back, I mean Harry the character, the monsters and villains that the Wizarding World has created, he still chooses to continue to talk to a system that benefits him and his generation as heroes. Percy is a hero that uses his platform to hold the powers that be accountable for the monsters that they created, aiming to leave a more just world behind him, make a better life for himself and his friends in the end, so no other demigod will ever be hurt in the way that he's been hurt, and that makes all the difference. Okay, you couldn't pay me to talk about Harry Potter ever again. Not online anyways. I started this video poking fun at the crappy fantasy books and other stuff I liked as a kid, about bad childhood habits of reading, writing, and drawing. I said, I'm not even making light of the things that make me happy as a kid and still make me happy now. I'm not going to do that anymore. I, like Percy, had different needs as a child, and like I didn't have ADHD or dyslexia, but I did have some issues that I need help from adults. But as a neurodivergent kids, I just didn't get them, and now I'm just sort of making up for like the inaction of the adults in my life as the grown up, similar to how Percy has to do by the end of his series. And also, I can't be mean to younger me because I had different needs as a child than I do as an adult. So while visiting Hogwarts with Harry and hanging out with Percy and the other Half-Bloods in New York was fun, I find that the same crappy playground stuff I noticed as a kid are still the same crappy playground stuff I notice now. Kids are ill-treated by a lot of adults. I think that as a society we see kids as a bargaining chip or full of productive potential as opposed to little people as they actually are. It's no wonder that some adults who had shitty treatment as children learn to gain their own power back by mistreating more children as they become adults, continuing the cycle as it goes along because it's what they were taught and it's what's easiest. That's why I'm glad to have read Harry Potter and Percy Jackson again. Reading Percy Jackson as a mystery kid helped me a lot as a mystery kid. Also, Harry Potter is like a shitty relative. Thanks for the memories, but I'm chucking you into the garbage right now. Yeet. It validates my issues as they presently were and made me more helpful for a future where what I said mattered and I had the power to make a better world. I still believe that. I'm listening, and I'm trying, and I'm doing the best I can. And hopefully that makes all the difference. So, yeah. Stay brilliant, scholars. I'll see you on the other side.